What do you owe a stranger? Not a friend, not family. A stranger who happens to fall in front of you at the wrong moment, on the wrong night, in a city that has trained everyone in it to keep moving. In Toronto, in January, in a parking garage that smells of exhaust and road salt, Regan Oakes was about to find out what her answer was, and it was going to cost her everything she thought she understood about herself. Regan was 27 and tired in the specific way that debt makes you tired. Not sleepy, but ground down, like something left too long under pressure. She worked nights as an emergency medical responder for the TTC, covering the subway tunnels and station platforms from Queen Street down to Union, the stretch of the city that saw its worst between midnight and 4 in the morning. She'd been doing it for 3 years, ever since she'd dropped out of her second year of nursing school at U of T to take care of her younger brother Bo, who had been diagnosed with a congenital heart defect that OHIP didn't fully address. She paid what the province didn't. She always had. It left nothing, which was fine. Regan had long since stopped expecting anything to be left. She had a rule, not a philosophy, not a code, a rule. Simple enough to fit in a sentence. You cannot save everyone, so save the ones directly in front of you and let the rest be someone else's problem. She'd learned it in her first month on the job, when she'd had to walk past a man in crisis on the King Street platform to reach a woman in cardiac arrest at the turnstile. Tridge, they called it in the textbook. In practice, it felt like abandonment, but it kept her functional, which was what mattered. It was 1:48 in the morning when the rule broke. She was cutting through the Harbour Square parking structure on her way back to her car after covering a delayed handoff at Union. The structure was half empty at that hour, the fluorescent lights buzzing above oil-stained concrete, the wind off Lake Ontario, finding its way in through the open levels and dropping the temperature below what the signage promised. She had her bag over one shoulder, her collar up, thinking about whether her account had enough for Beau's specialist appointment on Friday. She heard it before she saw it. Not a crash, not a shout. A sound like a man sitting down very suddenly and very wrong. A controlled collapse, almost dignified, the kind her training had taught her to read before her mind fully caught up to it. He was on the ground between 2 dark-colored SUVs, one hand braced flat on the concrete, the other pressed to his sternum. A man in his mid-40s, in an expensive suit now being ruined by the garage floor, dark hair, no visible injuries. He wasn't unconscious, his eyes were open, but they had the unfocused quality of someone whose body was very seriously trying to shut itself down. Regan stopped walking. Walk past. Call it in and keep moving. This isn't your jurisdiction. This isn't your shift. She noticed 3 things in quick succession. First, the bluish tinge at his lips. Not the grey of a cardiac event, but something more specific, something she'd seen in a toxicology module during a continuing education course 6 months ago. Second, a faint, sweetish smell in the air near him, like burnt almonds underneath the exhaust and cold. Third, across the parking level, a man in a long coat standing near the elevator bank, watching. Not moving, just watching. He wore 2 watches, one on each wrist, which was strange enough that it lodged itself immediately, the way strange things do at 2 in the morning. When her eyes found his, he turned and stepped into the elevator without a word. A couple walked through on the level below. She could hear their voices carrying upward. Heard the woman say quietly, "Don't stop." Heard the man agree, heard footsteps retreating. She dropped to her knees. Later she would try to explain the decision to herself. She would say it was the training taking over, the automatic assessment, hands moving before her brain had fully committed. But that wasn't entirely honest. The truth was that she looked at the man on the ground and saw her brother, saw what Beau looked like during his last episode, lying on the kitchen floor while she counted the seconds until the ambulance arrived. The absolute vulnerability of a human body failing. It didn't matter who the person was. You didn't get to choose. "Hey," she said, her voice low and even. "Look at me. Can you follow my hand?" His eyes found hers, dark eyes, extraordinarily alert for someone in his condition. She held up 2 fingers and moved them left. His gaze tracked. She moved them right. He tracked again. "Good. Breathe in slowly. Deep, can you do that?" She checked his pulse. Too slow. She unzipped her jacket, pulled out the portable SAT monitor she kept in her bag out of habit, clipped it to his finger. She unzipped his jacket. He let her, which told her he understood the situation, and pressed 2 fingers below his sternum, checking for organ tension. She tilted his head back slightly, opened his airway. His color improved fractionally. She reached for her phone. Not 911. She called the TTC medical line, got the night supervisor, gave the location and the presentation. Anonymous, just the information. "I need an EMS unit to Harbour Square Parkade, level 2 southeast corner. Adult male, possible organophosphate or carbamate exposure, compromised respiratory function, pulse in the low 40s. Are you on site, Oaks? I'm just passing through. She hung up. She stayed with him. She didn't know why. She should have gone. Instead, she sat on the cold concrete and monitored his sat levels and talked to him in the low, even voice she used on the subway platforms. Not falsely cheerful, just steady. She told him to breathe. She told him help was coming. And then his eyes focused. Really focused, for just a few seconds. He looked at her face with a clarity that meant he was seeing her specifically. A woman crouched beside him in a TTC issue jacket and a borrowed scarf, holding his wrist with cold fingers. And not just the blur of shock. She heard tires on the level below, too quiet and too fast. She stood up. She backed away into the shadow between the SUVs. As she turned, the Velcro on her sleeve caught on his cufflink, just for a moment, and when she pulled free, she heard something small hit the concrete. She didn't stop to look for it. She was 3 blocks away before she let herself shake. Lorcan Whitby did not wake up in Toronto General. The room was too quiet for a hospital, too precise. He lay in a private clinic room he recognized, one of 2 that the Whitby family maintained beneath a building on Wellington Street that appeared, on paper, to belong to a commercial real estate holding company. He had never expected to need it for himself. The pain was secondary to the fury. The fury was secondary to the calculation. How long? His voice came out rougher than intended. Griff Barnett, his second, was sitting in the chair by the window with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting a very long time. Griff was 53, had a face like a closed door, and had been with Lorcan's father before he was with Lorcan. He had the institutional memory of a man who had survived 3 different eras of the same operation. 14 hours, Griff said, comp out in the scotch at the gala. The glass is being analyzed. Who knew my schedule for the evening? That's the question we're working. Lorcan closed his eyes. The Whitby name had controlled the Port of Toronto's off-books operations for 22 years. The logistics, the import chains, the men who asked no questions and received commensurate pay. It was not a flashy empire, it was infrastructure, invisible, which was why it worked. Which was also why a leak from inside was not just a security failure. It was a surgical move by someone who understood the machine well enough to reach inside it. The police? He asked. Officially, you were taken ill at the gala and went home early. You are currently at a private resort in Muskoka recovering from exhaustion. And what actually happened in that parkade? Griff's expression shifted fractionally. Our team reached you 9 minutes after the call came in on TTC medical dispatch. You were stable. More stable than you should have been. Lorcan opened his hand. Something small was pressed against his palm. He didn't remember closing his fingers around it. It was a patch, a rectangular TTC emergency medical responder patch, the kind that attached to the arm of a jacket with Velcro. On the back, in permanent marker, a 4-digit staff ID number, the kind of notation you made when you had multiple patches and needed to keep track of which one was yours. He remembered cold fingers on his wrist, a voice low and unhurried saying breathe slowly, dark eyes above a borrowed scarf. Someone was with me before your team, he said. A woman. Find out who she is. He held up the patch. TTC would have a roster. Griff looked at the patch. She's not a threat? She's the reason I'm alive to have this conversation, Lorcan said. Find her. And I want to know why she stayed. For 9 days, Regan Oakes was a hostage to her own memory. She watched the news for any mention of Lorcan Whitby. The name appeared twice. Once in a business column about the Whitby Group's new waterfront development filing. Once in a society page caption from the gala she now recognized as the one at the Metro Convention Center the same night. He looked fine in the photo. Composed. The kind of composed that cost something. Which meant either he had recovered or he hadn't, and someone was doing an excellent job of pretending otherwise. She couldn't decide which option frightened her more. She worked her shifts. She called Beau about the specialist appointment and told him the insurance filing was being processed, which was mostly true. She stopped herself, 11 separate times, from Googling the Whitby family's connections to organized crime in this city, because she already knew enough, and she did not want to know more. Everyone in Toronto knew the Whitby name in the way you knew the names of things that were simply there, too large to question, operating on a scale ordinary people weren't meant to touch. The waterfront development, the port contracts, the construction unions. And underneath all of it, according to everyone and confirmed by no one, something else entirely. She told herself she had helped a man. A man. She was restocking the supply cabinet on a Wednesday afternoon when the station door opened. The man who came in first she didn't recognize, but she knew the type immediately, the type that moves through public space like it's already theirs, that scans a room in one pass and has identified every exit before anyone else looks up. The man who came in behind him she recognized without wanting to. Lorcan Whitby looked like a man who had recently been very unwell and had decided, through sheer authority of will, to be fully present anyway. There was a tightness in the way he moved, a care she could read professionally. But his eyes were clear and completely focused, and they found her immediately, the way she had found him in the parkade. He looked at her name tag, then at her face. "Regan Oakes," he said. It wasn't a question. Canner's voice was steady. She was proud of that. He came to the counter. He didn't look at the room around him, the shelves, the shift board, the other responder pulling on his jacket in the corner. He looked only at her. From his coat pocket, he set something on the counter between them. Her patch. The other responder zipped his jacket and walked out without glancing up. The door swung shut. The man who wasn't Lorcan stayed near the entrance. "I believe that's yours," Lorcan said. "I don't know what you're talking about," her voice held. He studied her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Patient, in the way of someone who is arranged to have all the time they need. "You called TTC dispatch at 1:52 a.m., he said quietly. The supervisor confirmed a female voice. Medical phrasing. No name given. The patch traces to your locker assignment. He paused. "And I remember your eyes. You have the kind of eyes that look at a person instead of a situation." Regan said nothing. "I'm not here to threaten you," he said. "If that were my intent, you would not be having this conversation. You would simply have found things becoming very difficult. Your shift assignments, your brother's insurance file, the lease on your apartment." He said it not cruelly but plainly, the way you explain a fact of weather. "I'm here because I owe you a debt. I don't carry debts." He waited. "Name your price," he said. "Whatever it costs." Regan looked at her patch on the counter. She picked it up and put it in her pocket. "I don't have a price," she said. "I did what I was trained to do. You were a person and you were dying and everyone else kept walking. That's the whole story. I don't want anything from you." Lorcan Whitby was quiet for a moment with the look of a man encountering something he hadn't included in his calculations. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "I'm extremely afraid of you," Regan said. "I'm also angry. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Something shifted in his face, not a smile, the precursor to one. He left without another word. The envelope appeared under her apartment door on Saturday morning, cream-colored, heavy stock. Her name written on the front in handwriting that was precise and slightly old-fashioned. Inside, a bank draft for $120,000, in the memo line one word, settled. Regan sat on her kitchen floor with it in her hands for a long time. It was enough, not approximately, exactly enough, for Beau's surgery and the follow-up appointments. For the semester deposit at U of T, for the version of her life that had been interrupted 3 years ago and that she had stopped believing she would ever return to. All of it in a single piece of paper. She put it in her jacket and went to find him. The Whitby Group occupied the top 4 floors of a glass building on Bay Street that announced itself with the aggressive quietness of old money. No flashy signage, just the address and a receptionist who looked at Regan's transit jacket with perfect blankness. Lorcan met her in the lobby. She suspected he'd known she was coming before she'd reached the subway platform. "You can't pay me," she said when she reached him. She pushed the envelope against his chest. "I'm not a loose end you settle. I'm a person who made a choice. Take this back." He didn't take it. He looked at it for a moment, then at her. "Refusing the payment is an insult," he said. "In my world it implies the debt isn't real, that I imagined needing help. That requires a response. That is the most convoluted logic I have ever encountered." "Have dinner with me," he said. Regan stared at him. She actually laughed, which surprised her. He said, "The remedy is dinner. 1 hour. If after that you want to disappear from my life entirely, I will arrange it." She thought about the 2 watches, the details she'd been carrying for 9 days, untouched, not sure what to do with it. The man in the parking garage who had stood and watched and left when she looked at him. "One dinner," she said, "and you take this back." She pressed the envelope into his hand. He took it this time and tucked it inside his jacket. The restaurant was the kind of place where the menus had no prices, and the lighting was calibrated to make everyone look like a better version of themselves. Regan sat across from Lorcan Whitby in a private room and tried to eat the food in front of her and tried not to think too hard about any of it. He was not what she'd expected. She had prepared for performance. Instead, he was precise and genuinely attentive. He asked about her training, about the specific toxicology knowledge she'd applied in the parkade, and listened to the answers as though they were interesting to him in themselves. He spoke about his own work obliquely, but without pretending the gaps didn't exist. He used words like operations and logistics, where the newspapers used different words, and he didn't apologize for the translation. "The gala," she said finally. "Whoever did that to you, they knew exactly where you'd be." His expression didn't change exactly, but it became a degree more still. "Yes. Someone who had access to your schedule, someone close, someone who would also know what compound to use. What would produce that specific presentation without something more obvious?" She hesitated. "Have you looked at your physician? The person who would know every medical variable, what you drink, what a clean result would need to look like." Lorcan looked at her steadily. "What makes you raise that?" "I'm not saying it's him," she said. "I'm saying that whoever did this was in that parkade. He was there before I called it in, before anyone else would have known to be there. He was watching you from the elevator bank. When I looked at him, he left." She paused. "He was wearing 2 watches, one on each wrist. I don't know why it stuck, it just did." The silence that followed was complete. "Describe him," Lorcan said. She did. The coat, the height, the watches, the way he'd moved, unhurried, which was its own kind of wrong. Lorcan set down his fork with the care of someone holding something much larger, very still. "Griff," he said to the room. She hadn't known Griff Barnett was in the room. He stepped out from a position near the door she hadn't identified as a position. 3 seconds of eye contact passed between the 2 men that clearly communicated a complete sentence. "Tomorrow," Lorcan said. Griff was already on his phone as he stepped out. She didn't mean to be there when it happened. Lorcan walked her out at the end of the evening, and they were standing on the pavement when a car pulled up, and from it stepped a man she didn't know. Narrow face, fine hands, an overcoat, a briefcase, 2 watches. Regan went very still. The man was speaking to Lorcan. Something about a filing, professionally even, and he didn't look at her. She looked at the watches, at the hands, at the particular quality of a man who has decided to behave normally and is almost succeeding. "That," she said, quietly, "just a fact." The effect was immediate. Lorcan raised one hand and Griff moved, and the man with the briefcase registered it half a second too late. He turned and made it approximately 4 steps before 2 men materialized from the shadows of the building's entrance and stopped him with an efficiency that frightened her in its completeness. His name was Dr. Harmon Vrell. He had been the Whitby family's private physician for 16 years. He had also, for the last 3, been on the quiet retainer of a competing consortium that wanted control of the port contracts and had decided the most efficient path was removal. He had administered the compound in Lorcan's glass at the gala. He had driven to the parkade to confirm the result. He had not confirmed the result because Regan Oakes had been crossing that parkade at 1:48 in the morning with nowhere else to be, and a rule she wasn't able to keep. They took Dr. Vrell to a room in a building near the waterfront that Regan suspected she would not be able to find again on a map. She sat near the wall while Griff and 2 men she didn't know asked questions that Dr. Vrell answered with increasing speed. He confessed to the compound, to the arrangement with the consortium, to choosing the gala because Lorcan's primary security had been sent ahead to a separate meeting, a gap in the schedule that only a handful of people would have known. When it was over, Lorcan looked at her. "You should be very uncomfortable," he said. "I am very uncomfortable," she said. "What are you going to do with him?" Lorcan said nothing. "He has people," Regan said. "I'm not saying that changes what he did. I'm just saying it." Lorcan walked to the window. Lake Ontario was invisible beyond it in the dark, but she could feel its presence, the cold coming off it, the scale of it, the way it made the city feel smaller than it thought it was. "Exile," he said finally, "out of the country, out of medicine. If he surfaces, everything he's told us tonight goes to every party he's ever worked with." He paused. "It's not mercy, it's a longer sentence." "I know," Regan said. "Don't thank me," he said. "You found him again." He turned from the window. "You keep saving my life, and I keep owing you things I don't know the right currency for." He walked her to her car. The air off the lake was bitter and clean. They stood in the cold for a moment without speaking. "This is it then," she said. "Whatever the debt was, it's settled." Lorcan looked at her for a long time. His face, in the dark, had none of the control of the boardroom or the restaurant. He looked, for once, entirely like himself. "Tell me to go," he said. "Say it and I'll disappear from your life so completely that in 6 months you'll wonder if any of this was real." Regan stood with her car keys in her hand and thought about the apartment with the new deadbolt that had appeared on her door 2 weeks ago, without explanation. About Beau's surgery date and the number she still hadn't covered, about the version of her life that existed before the Harbour Square parkade, and whether she actually wanted to go back to it, or whether she had only ever stayed there because no one had offered her anything else. She thought about the man on the parking garage floor, about the couple who had kept walking, about what it costs specifically to be the one who doesn't. "I'm not going to tell you to go," she said. It was not the beginning of something easy. She understood that, standing there in the wind off the lake. She was not walking into something uncomplicated or safe or remotely close to the life she'd planned. But she was also, for the first time in 3 years, walking towards something instead of simply running in place. 6 months later, Regan Oakes sat at a table she had never expected to sit at, in a room full of men who moved between the visible and invisible layers of the city like it was simply geography. Lorcan stood at the head of the table and spoke briefly. About what had happened in January, about the betrayal, about who had found the truth while his entire organization had been looking in the wrong direction. He didn't dress it up. Then he said, "Regan Oakes sees what we don't, because we're too close to see it. She is not part of this operation. But she has my complete confidence and she will have yours. Is that clear?" It was not a question. Beau's surgery was scheduled for the following month, covered in full by an arrangement that asked nothing in return except that she finish her degree. She'd re-enrolled in January. She was 1 semester behind her original cohort, and she intended to close the gap by spring. She was not the woman who had been running on debt and 2-hour sleeps, and a rule that had taken 3 years to crack. She was not yet who she was going to become. She was somewhere in between, which was, she had come to understand, the only place any honest person ever actually stands. After the room cleared, Lorcan came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. He had learned that she didn't need him to fill silence with words she hadn't asked for. "Do you think it was bravery?" she asked him. "Not about the meeting. About the night in the parkade. About the 3 seconds between hearing the sound and deciding what to do with the next hour of her life." "I've been thinking about that since January," he said. "And I think bravery and recklessness look identical from the outside," he said carefully. "The difference is in what you're holding on to while it's happening, what you refuse to put down." Regan thought about cold concrete and a sat monitor and a man's eyes finding hers in the fluorescent dark. She thought about what she had held on to and what she had not let go of even when everything else was telling her to. "Then I think I'm all right," she said. She wasn't naive enough to believe the hardest part was behind her, but she was honest enough to know it was a beginning. And beginnings she had learned from nursing school and from 2 in the morning and from a parking garage in January were the only things worth paying attention to. What do you think? When Regan stepped forward, was it a choice or was it just who she already was? And is there even a difference? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story found you tonight, hit that like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. Until next time, stay warm out there.